Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Independent Thought. My name is Desmond Price, and today I'm joined by Omar, an organizer with Montanan for Palestine. Omar, how are you doing today? Thank you for being on the show.
Doing well, Desmond. Thanks so much for having me on. It really means a lot to help promote everything
Yeah,
we're doing.
absolutely. No, I really appreciate what you and your organization is doing. I'm glad to have a chance to get to talk to you today about everything. First and foremost, though, for people who are unaware, obviously we're going to talk about what's going on in Israel and what's happening in Gaza, some different actions that people are looking to take in order to kind of combat what's happening over there through here in America. But before we get into any of that, like just firstly, what is Montana for Palestine?
So, Montana for Palestine initially started as Montanans in solidarity with Palestine, and really what it was, they're just two guys got together, um, Eamon and Brendan. Both have lived in the West Bank and Palestine at the times. One was a journalist, and then the other one was teaching English there in the West Bank. So, they saw the Palestinian people, they felt for them, they saw the conditions and oppression they lived under. And obviously we have wars in Gaza specifically every couple of years, as well as the constant oppression of the West Bank. So Palestinians, held a dear spot in these two individuals' hearts. And well, they're both based in Missoula. Back in 21, when Gaza was under attack by Israel again, they both decided, you know what, we got to do something about this, and kind of went out, held some signs up, just them two. And then, they're like, let's do a real rally. They did a real protest, had a good turnout in downtown Missoula. And, shortly after, that war in Gaza ended, thankfully. But, since they're well aware of the history of Palestine and Gaza and the siege on Gaza that's been going on for almost 2 decades now, they knew this wouldn't be the end. They created the Instagram account and all the social media's accounts already, which is Montana for Palestine. And sadly, they're like, we got to keep it up because we know we're going to have to use this again in the future. So, fast forward a couple of years, here we are, as all your viewers know about what's happening in Gaza. And then it naturally kind of took on its own shape. People that had been in the rally before, a couple of years back, reached out. They're like, hey, we got to do something about this. And it kind of just formed a life of its own. At this point, we've branched out from Missoula. Obviously, we're in Bozeman, Billings. We've had protests in both of those cities, actions in Butte, people, in Great Falls and all other places throughout Montana that are active. And each kind of city has become its own autonomous uh, role, but we all, follow the three main demands, which is a ceasefire now in Gaza, stopping aid and funding to Israel and selling of arms to Israel. And then the third and foremost is ending the siege altogether on Gaza that, again, has been going on for almost 2 decades now.
Right. So let's talk about these goals specifically. How is it that Montana for Palestine is essentially hoping to achieve these goals? I've seen you kind of like have rallies in specific areas around Montana. Are there certain people you're trying to pressure? How are you pressuring them? Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we made pretty clear, we're primarily pressuring Senator Tester right now, um, for quite a few reasons here. One is that, him being a moderate, arguably one of the only moderates in office in Montana that holds as much power as him, we think we have the greatest chance, um, of him getting on board. And, he's also the chair of the Defense Appropriation,
Okay.
Committee. So he holds tremendous power as far as how much money from the Department of Defense is allocated and where it goes. So that's why we're primarily pressuring Tester. Obviously, we have Zinke and Daines. Zinke's made it very clear he's really racist towards Palestinians, wanting
Yeah,
to
we know
ban
who he
them more.
is.
Yeah. So we're not really putting too much effort into them currently because essentially they're a lost cause. We'll definitely keep pressuring them as well, but Tester we feel like is our biggest chance at getting any progress politically.
Okay. And honestly, it's it's the right move as far as I'm concerned. He's in the most vulnerable position. Coming into the 2024 election, he's fighting for votes right now. He had marginal victories in 2018, 2012. So he needs all the support he can get. He can't really afford to shed support in this state. So, this is the perfect time to essentially extract concessions if we're just talking plainly here. And I hate to put it that bluntly, but like, we got to use all the leverage that we can in order to kind of like push people in power into doing the right thing, because apparently just doing the right thing isn't enough for some of these people. I saw that in one rally in particular, or that one meeting in particular, someone had asked him whether or not he was open to a ceasefire. He said no. How did people feel about that when they heard him kind of blatantly say that he was against a ceasefire?
I mean, all kinds of emotions, but definitely anger and being upset, and just his kind of blatant disregard for what's really happening, on the streets in Gaza, and just kind of brushing it over and be like, oh, this is war. This is what happens when no, it doesn't need to be that way. Israel's got one of the most sophisticated militaries and intelligence. Yeah, they were choosing to just carpet bomb this whole area indiscriminately. So yeah, when we weren't happy with his response whatsoever, and he's just acting like there's nothing he can do, which is not the truth.
Right. Yeah. Americans, the American government has a massive amount of influence over all of this for people who aren't aware. If we conditioned our aid to Israel, if we said that we might withdraw military support from Israel, that would put them in such a vulnerable position, surrounded by nations who have tensions with them: Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, Iran, Egypt. They would find themselves probably being a lot less hawkish if they did not have the U.S. support, to which I think, people here at home, it's right to ask our government to talk to Israel about, conditioning that support, potentially withdrawing that support completely if they do not stop their assault in Gaza. But I want to transition a little bit here to focusing directly on you.
Okay.
I know that whenever people get into organizations like this, get involved in kind of like the consistent trying to rally of people like this, there's always a personal lens to it. So I want to ask you about yours. Why is this so important for you specifically? Do you have any ties over there to the people of Palestine?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my father was born and raised in the West Bank in a town called Messiah, and it's roughly an hour and 15, hour and a half north of Jerusalem. So, he grew up in that oppression, and I still have family there to this day. Aunt and cousins and other cousins from different family members that are still here, but roughly I'd say about 10 family members. We have a huge family, close to 71st cousins. So it's
Yeah.
a little hard to keep track of all of us, but yeah, direct family there still living in Messiah to this day. And so obviously holds a dear place in my heart.
Yeah,
Um,
I think the West Bank is an area that hasn't been getting, as much attention, obviously, because the assaults taking place in Gaza. And so for those who might not be aware right now, could you just give us a little bit of information? What exactly are people in the West Bank experiencing when it comes to the Israeli government, essentially Israeli settlers? Could you give us some information about that?
yeah, absolutely. And you're totally right. The sad reality of this situation, as I said in one of my speeches, is there's atrocities happening in the West Bank currently, that have ramped up since October 7th. We don't have time to talk about those because the situation in Gaza is so dire,
Yeah.
um, which doesn't take away what's happening in the West Bank. And I just talked to my cousin who's living in the West Bank the other day, and he said the same exact thing. He's like, man, we're going through so much shit here. And he's like, I feel bad even complaining because we look at the Gazans and it's like we have it good compared to them. Which again doesn't take away the suffering that people are going through the West Bank, but just some of the things that they're going through ever since October 7th, the checkpoints that Israel has all throughout these different Palestinian villages that keep each town segregated since they're surrounded by illegal Israeli settlements. Well, the Israeli military has really doubled, tripled down on these checkpoints. So, for example, a 30-minute drive is now taking 3 hours because at every checkpoint, they're pulling everybody out of the car, searching them extremely thoroughly, going through their phones. Um, if they see you liked a post on Instagram that's slightly talking badly about Israel or condemning their actions, soldiers are just straight up beating people right then and there and putting them back in their car or arresting them, depending on what the post was. But they can't arrest everybody because there's only so much room in jails. But um, they're taking women's hijabs off, completely violating their customs of their religion, um, because a woman's not supposed to show her hair in public to anyone who's not a family member, a direct family member. Um, so that's just one of the many things. Something I want to note: Messiah, the village, the town that my father's from, it's one of the most privileged towns in the West Bank. One of the wealthiest. It's known as the Beverly Hills of the West Bank of Palestine, if you will. Um, and that being said, the things that are happening there are insane. Prior to this, actually, back in June of this year, over 200 Israeli settlers came into that town, as well as other towns nearby. But they came into my family's town and just started attacking people. They set fire to two of my family members' houses, one of my cousins, as well as my grandfather's. Thankfully, the whole structures didn't burn down, but over $50,000 worth of damage in just my grandfather's house alone. They set fire to one of my cousin's brand new cars, who he had just moved out there for his first time. He never even lived there. So he's an American citizen. He's trying to go live there with the rest of our family. Brand new car, burnt it down. What's even worse about that, obviously, is there's no insurance to cover that.
Yeah.
So this is just pure cash that they're bleeding. On top of, one person was killed in those attacks. I think approximately 15 were injured. This is all before October 7th. This is just what it's like living in these occupied lands. And to make it even worse is there was 2 arrests from the Israeli government, and I think five people were detained. And I was just trying to read on this earlier today. I found an article a couple months later. At that point, there still were not any charges pressed against those 2 that were arrested. And oftentimes settlers will murder Palestinians in cold blood, with really no case of self-defense whatsoever, and oftentimes never get charged. So this is just something that happens often. But since October 7th, like I said, checkpoints have increased. It's approximately 60% of people in this town, which I think is around 3,000 people, work outside of it. A 30-minute drive again is taking 3 hours. So they're trying to, make their ends meet and put food on their table. And now, let's say 8 to 10 hour workday is looking more like a 15, 16-hour workday because of these insane commutes. A couple other things that happens.
Yeah, I want to ask you a really quick question about the settlements. Now, I think for a lot of, Americans, they're just learning about all of this in real time, for whatever the reasons, various reasons across the board, depending on who you are, might not have had any information about what's the inner workings of what's happening in Israel, Gaza, the West Bank, prior to the October 7th attacks. So when we talk about Israeli settlers, can you go a little bit more specific for that, for maybe like in a one-on-one fashion for people who just really don't know what exactly are, I guess, residents of Israel doing as far as when you refer to settlements in the West Bank?
So, the West Bank's been occupied by Israel since '67, and since then they've allowed Israelis to settle in parts of it. Like, it goes against international law, and they continue to violate it. So they'll build these towns in the West Bank, bordering other Palestinian towns, and continue to do so. Often they're taking Palestinian land. Oftentimes it's just privately owned land that Israel seizes throughout various means. Sometimes it's been through wars. The war in '67 gave Israel control of it. At that point, they seized control of about 50% of the land in the West Bank, which gave them reign to do whatever they want. And so if they wanted to allow Israeli settlers to come over from Israel into the West Bank, they did, and they would fund them to some extent as well. And they kept building and building. And then up until around 93, I think, is when the Oslo Accords happened. Those peace agreements were designed to stop the settlements. That was like their primary goal.
Yeah.
And then the Israeli prime minister who signed that along with Arafat, the Israeli prime minister ended up getting assassinated 2 years later. When he signed those accords, there was a lot of pushback from right-wing Israelis who did not want that to happen, because there's a lot of right-wing Israelis that view all of the West Bank, all of Gaza, parts of Syria, and other countries as part of Israel. Based off their holy text, they think they have the right to all that land. So again, that prime minister was assassinated, and since then the government's become more and more right-wing, just pushing settlements and allowing them to happen more and more, even though they're illegal under international law.
I appreciate you filling us in on all this, because I mentioned this in a previous show that I did over on my other podcast, The Left Wing. For me, I am learning about all of this in real time. So, I mean, I'm also one of those Americans who didn't really know a whole lot about what was going on in Gaza, Israel, the West Bank until just this year. And now I feel like I'm trying to play catch up, trying to learn about it as much as I possibly can, trying to educate myself. And, I think sometimes it's a little bit of you feel a little almost embarrassed that you don't know more about what's happening in the world, and then you have that kind of realization just about like exactly just how much atrocities people are facing, and then also the direct involvement that our government has had in what is happening over there. One of the things that I came across recently, why I asked you about the West Bank, was because I came across the fact that you know I saw that rural Palestinians, have been collecting rainwater for centuries, like in the West Bank, something that, Israel has been trying to crack down on that practice. They don't even want them collecting rainwater, saying that Palestinian farmers are suffering through water shortages while the settlements over in the West Bank have lots of green lawns and like swimming pools. Also saying that Palestinian owned like cisterns, which they've had for hundreds of years to store this rainwater, has been going dry, as the Israeli military is now destroying dozens of these cisterns in the West Bank. And the legal system in the West Bank allows for this to happen. And as a result, there's now 180 like Palestinian communities that haven't had any running water since 2017. And there's a direct military order, Order 158, which forbids Palestinians from building water infrastructure without any Israeli permits. It's honestly unbelievable to me. More than 80% of the West Bank's groundwater is either flows into Israel or gets used by Israeli settlements. That absolutely just, I couldn't believe what I was reading. Honestly, as I'm learning more and more about what's happening over there, it is becoming more believable to me, but I guess it doesn't diminish the shock value of just essentially how people who are in these occupied territories are kind of living almost as second-class citizens. And I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that whatsoever.
Not
That's
even
something I wanted to ask
marginally
you about. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about
worse.
that now. Like, what are some of the other, I guess you would say, second-class laws or racist laws that you have seen imposed by the Israeli government onto people in the West Bank and in Gaza?
Absolutely. And I want to say, no one should feel any shame for, ignorance on this subject. And they don't really teach us this in America.
No.
Let's be real. The only reason I know as much as I do is because I have, direct ties there. So, this happens all across the world, sadly, and often, by America's hand. And obviously, they don't want to teach us the atrocities that America's been committing for decades in all kinds of different countries. Other laws, though, the Israeli military and government can demolish houses, confiscate them, simply if either for any terrorist activities or if they suspect you have terrorist activities. And it's not only for just that individual, that can extend also to their family members or neighbors. So for something that they wouldn't have anything to do with whatsoever, if someone's suspected of it and then you're a neighbor of them, you potentially can be looking at your house getting bulldozed down. Israel created other things such as absentee laws. So if a house was abandoned, whether it be for more or whatever it was, then Israel can essentially claim power to it, and as soon as they like give it to a settler or designate it as like Israeli, essentially, then that person can never ever go back to their house. Here's another one, which is also messed up: is if a Palestinian marries an Israeli citizen, they won't get Israeli citizenship. Um,
Wow.
they don't want Palestinians to get Israeli citizenship, more than the ones that already have it, that were kind of grandfathered in when Israel was created, the ones that weren't held by gunpoint to leave, or the seven, murdered, or 750,000 that had to flee, or else they would get murdered. Well, if they let them get grant citizenship, it pretty quickly wouldn't be a Jewish homeland anymore. And I think they're well aware of that. I've talked to many Israelis and Jewish friends of mine about that. And the goal of Israel is to be a Jewish majority state. There's sadly way too many laws to go through all of them, but Palestinian land can also be confiscated in the name of archaeological and tourism purposes. Settlements are allowed to be built based off of military security. Israeli law claims that building more illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank increases their military security. So these are just some of the many, many ways that they do it, that we can't go over every single way, sadly.
Yeah, it feels overwhelming
It,
trying to learn
it
about all
is.
this, trying to talk about all this. I can't imagine what these people have been going through for their entire lives, essentially being treated as second class citizens over in the West Bank, over in Gaza. It begs the question that I want to kind of like round out now with you. What is the way forward? Like how do we go from where we're at now to someplace better? The Biden administration came out recently and reaffirmed their position on wanting a two-state solution. There have been lots of talks behind the scenes that Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, is very much against a two-state solution, wanting to only have there be one state. And it makes me wonder, like, what is next for the people of the West Bank, for the people of Gaza, who, I mean, Gaza might be destroyed beyond repair by the time this is all over. So what do you think what can come next from all of this, or what should come next?
Absolutely. And arguably, Gaza's arguably already at that point, with 50% of houses either destroyed or damaged from all the bombings. But two-state solution is the only way we're ever going to see peace. I can't see anything else. I think a one-state solution would have been totally fine as well. But that was never the goal of Israel, because it was always supposed to be a Jewish homeland when it was created in 1948. Hence them expelling nearly 1 million and murdering over 10,000. So one-state solution is obviously never going to happen, or that would have been the case, because Jews, Christians, and Muslims were all living there relatively peacefully until they were kicked out if they weren't Jewish. And as far as a two-state solution goes, well, now the West Bank, and what's considered the West Bank from the 67 lines, 1967, there's around 500,000 Israeli settlers that live in there. And I can't see, I would never see the Israeli government saying, hey, you have to come back to Israel. We're talking about 500,000 people that's been living there for decades, which is messed up. So the only way I could see two states, if they give the West Bank back in the 1967 lines, they give Palestine the control of that, it would have to be something where all citizens are treated equally, which is how any country obviously should be. Which then again, I can't see the settlers being okay with that either, with the amount of hatred just that's fueled so much. But again, two-state solution is the only way forward. And if Israel wants to solve this problem, they're going to have to kind of deal with it, and they have the means of doing it. The settlers don't have to stay in the West Bank. It's totally something that would be possible, but sadly, I don't see how realistic that would actually be. I don't have a lot of hopes for it, I guess I should say. I'm just feeling somewhat pessimistic about it.
It's easy to feel pessimistic about it. I mean, with the onslaught of terrible news coming out of that region right now, it's it's hard to feel any kind of hope, but obviously organizations like Montana for Palestine, you're trying to do your best to rally people, here in the state, trying to get people to do everything that they can to pressure representatives, pressure senators, pressure the president, calling for a ceasefire. I want to kind of end this conversation around going back to Montana for Palestine. What is next for the organization? Are you holding more demonstrations around the state? Is there any kind of like big event that you're doing? And how can people get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the 3rd of December, we're going to have a statewide rally in Helena, which is going to be awesome. We're getting, all the different cities that have been organizing and rallying together. Um, so you can follow our social medias, MT for Palestine, and stay up to date on that. But it'd be awesome if anyone could come out for that. We're just continuing to grow and organize further. We're from some inside information that I'm hearing from people within the Democratic Party and also just in other nonprofits and whatnot. We're getting Tester's attention, and he's worried about it. His margin's small, so we're going to keep getting louder, keep organizing, keep putting pressure until Tester listens to his constituents and politicians start actually making an effort to treat Palestinians as humans.
It's sad that we have to sort of like play politics like this in the sense of like pressuring someone like John Tester, but it's absolutely going to work as far as I'm concerned. He has no room for error in this state. He needs everyone to come out and vote for him next year, or else he's not going to get reelected. He's just not going to get reelected. And so he's in the ultimate position of vulnerability. So if you're listening to this and you want to get involved and you're not sure if getting involved is actually going to make a difference or not, I guarantee you it's going to make a difference. John Tester, once these dominoes start falling in the Senate, it's just going to be a matter of time. The Biden administration is definitely feeling the heat right now. Like they are trying to, they're starting to give concessions that they have never given before. And I feel like if the pressure continues to mount, they will have no choice but to call for a ceasefire. We're already seeing a little bit of the groundwork laid for that. And I think if the unrest continues, if people continue to speak out, if people continue to just like use their voices online, show up for protests, things of that nature, they're going to have to respond. Unfortunately, politicians care about nothing more than staying in office, and we're approaching an election year. So they are all hyper vigilant about their potentially losing their seats of power going into next year's election. So it's the perfect time to get them to do what they shouldn't have to be forced to do in the first place. But here we are.
Yeah.
Omar.
I just want to say Tester's definitely scared. His margin of victory was super slim last time, and he knows he needs everything if he wants to win. And our message that we've been sending to him is, hey, currently we're rallying against you since you're not doing the right thing. And we will continue to do so until you decide to take some action to help Palestinians and stop watching a genocide unfold. But on the other hand, if he decides to become an ally of ours and actually stand up for what's right and treating humans with dignity, we'll absolutely rally and gather for him and canvas and help him win. And we have no doubt that we can actually do that, especially with how passionate young voters are about this topic. And he needs every single young vote he could get.
I mean, as we go forward now, millennials, Gen Z, we are now overtaking the boomers and the Gen X as far as the larger voting block here in America. So what we want needs to be more at the forefront as far as I'm concerned. Omar, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We really do appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to explain all of this to us, to talk about Montana for Palestine. For those who are interested in getting more involved, where can they find you at online?
Absolutely. All of our socials are MT for Palestine, just the digit 4. So MT for Palestine all together. You can follow us there. We're going to be, updating any events that we have that way. And then if you're interested in further action, message our page. Just say, hey, I'm interested further. We'll take it from there and help get you involved.
All right. Sounds like sending them a DM on Instagram is the way to go. Make sure you do that. Check out those links. They'll be in the episode description right now for those who are interested. And make sure you share this episode. Instagram X, I guess people are calling it now, Facebook, if people are still find themselves on there. Appreciate everyone who listened to this episode. We will see you in the next one.
Thanks so much for having me, Desmond.